coming up on Chesapeake Collectibles.
It has some of the finest craftsmanship that I've seen in a quilt.
He carried that knife with him to California on the gold rush.
Looks like Grizzly Adams, one of those characters.
There is what looks like a small swastika, which actually is in reverse and is a symbol that was used in a lot of different cultures.
This painting was done by a British artist, and he's still being sold today by major galleries such as Sotheby's and Christie's.
Chesapeake Collectibles is made possible in part by the MPT New Initiative Fund, founded by Irene and Edward H. Kaplan. Additional funding for Chesapeake Collectibles provided by Preston Chefknocker Properties, a real estate tradition since 1867.
Welcome back to Chesapeake Collectibles. Every week we explore our region's incredible history through its treasures, its people, and your stories. Hi, I'm your host, Rhea Fiken. You know, our studios are just bustling with hundreds of people sharing their treasures with us, and I'm astonished by the value of so many and touched by their priceless personal stories. Right now, let's dive into these riches.
I see you've brought in a Bowie knife.
I have. It's my great-great-grandfather's.
And he is local?
He was born in the Baltimore area, and he carried that knife with him to California on the gold rush. He was in California from about 1849 to 1851-52.
Okay, so there was a very famous gold rush. That's when people ran willy-nilly in the direction of gold. And this was in California in 1849.
Right.
And I think there's some kind of sports team named the 49ers in California.
Right.
Well, that's because of the gold rush from 49. So this is a Bowie knife, a typical form where we have a wooden handle that has been decorated with gripping like on a gun stock so that it doesn't slip out of your hand when it's wet with blood or water. It has a nice guard to keep your fingers from sliding forward when the blade is pulled out of its leather sheath. The sheath is decorated. It's tipped with brass, and the collar is brass. And on the back, there's a belt loop, and it lightly inscribed Otter Creek. Another name, probably Arbitrator or Arbitron, which is maybe a gold mining camp at that time that no longer exists because I've Googled it. And there isn't a city or a town in Northern California or Oregon or Washington by that name, so we don't know. And there's yet another word on here that's hard to read. So. Now, on the blade itself, there's the word Reinhardt, which is a maker's mark, and that would be Charles Reinhardt. And he made cutlery and Bowie knives, obviously, from about 1837 to about 1863. So, a long working history, and there are a couple of books that mention him in them. There's one on Bowie knives by Flannerman, and there's yet another one on American cutlery made across the states, but he'll be mentioned in those. So we have a Bowie knife that goes back to 1849 at least. It was carried to California and back, and the owner survived because he's your relative.
That's right.
And we have a picture of him on a book cover, and he looks very rustic. He looks like a Grizzly Adams,
yes.
One of those characters. He probably has a fur hat, he has a full beard, he has very broad shoulders, and he probably wears a buffalo skin coat underneath buckskins. It's all about his life, basically, from the time when he was young. And he left in 1849 for the gold rush. He left behind a wife and 2 children.
That's right.
I'm sure the wife was not happy.
Well, he had to have his adventure, so.
And then he returned.
He did.
And became a prosperous merchant and gentleman.
Yeah, and I think he died around 1890, something like that.
Okay.
So, and this is him and his wife, dear Lizzie, at an older age. I
Right.
think maybe they probably had these pictures done when they were traveling in Europe later in life.
Probably so.
Yeah, but definitely a different look than than his Grizzly Adams period.
Right, this is when he was young, this is when he was respected later in life.
Right.
Okay. And you have other papers that go along with this that reference the Civil War and prisoners of war and that sort of thing.
Right. And I also have this portrait in my dining room and his wedding, the Quaker wedding certificate when he and his wife got married, which is a large, you know, like 24 by 36 framed piece that you fill in the dates and the time of the wedding, and then everybody who attends the wedding signs it.
Right, I've seen those before.
Yeah.
Well, it's interesting. You have a lot of family history here and a lot of Baltimore history. Well, as far as the value of the knife at auction, I would expect with the history that you have and the archive, all of it together, it would probably push the value of the knife in the $2,000, $2,500 range. And of course, the replacement value would be higher than that. But it's a very lovely knife. I've always loved the form of Bowie knives, and
I imagine he probably used it a great deal while he was there, so it was important to him at the time.
Oh, essential weapon and accoutrement.
Right.
Thank you very much for bringing this in.
Thank you.
Welcome to Chesapeake Collectibles. It's great to have you with us today. What did you bring with you?
I brought a quilt that's been in my family for many generations. It was a presentation quilt given to my great uncle's side of the family. It was made in 1858 and presented in 1860. It was to be given on the arrival of the birth of their first child. There's a part here that says to whom it was to be given and who made it, and the date and the location of Woodbine in Westmoreland County, March 1860.
1860. So this was prior to the Civil War.
Yes, ma'am, prior to the Civil War. It survived the Civil War.
It is lovely. It is lovely. It has what I believe is some of the finest craftsmanship that I've seen in a quilt, and the condition is very good. While when we've looked at it, we've noted that there were some minor wear.
Right.
It's certainly what you might expect to encounter with a piece of this age.
All right.
The colors are vibrant. The star pattern is a popular pattern in quilting. The size of the piecework is small, which indicates the skill and the craftsmanship of the women who made this.
All right.
And obviously, a tremendous amount of time went into the creation of this piece.
So this is a star pattern. I wondered what the pattern was.
Yes, it is lovely, and I'm quite certain valued in your home.
Yes.
For its history.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
We were just wondering if anybody had any idea what the value was, more like for insurance purposes than for anything else, because we're not giving it up. It'll go from
certainly not.
us
Do
to our
you
daughter.
have children who might inherit it?
Yes, I do.
Oh,
I have a
okay,
daughter
great.
who
So
will
it has a
definitely
future.
inherit it. It definitely has a future. It has a great past, but it also has a future.
That's good to know. You raised the question of insurance purposes.
Yes.
And that is an important qualifier or quantifier because values have to serve a purpose. Okay, and an insurance value is much greater than what would commonly compare to a fair market value, which would be what an item might sell for in the open market.
Right.
For insurance purposes, I would insure this for a minimum of $20,000.
Oh my goodness.
Comparable pieces of the age, the style, the quality have sold at auction for between $6,000 and $10,000.
Oh my goodness.
But
oh my goodness.
Again, that's a fair market value.
Right.
And for insurance, you would have to guarantee that if it were ever lost in a fire or through some form of destruction, that you could acquire a piece as old, as fine as this particular quilt is. I would insure it for nothing less than $20,000.
Right, thank you, because there's no way to replace the family history part to it.
Certainly not, no.
So thank you. Thank you so much for having us today.
How you doing? I'd like to welcome you to Chesapeake Collectibles today. I understand you were a bus driver for Greyhound.
Yes, I started with them in 1979, and that's when I started collecting. A supervisor got me into collecting toy buses, and this is some of my collection of maybe 300 buses. 300
buses, wow. You do have a great selection here that you brought in for us today. Let's talk about this first little guy here. This is from 1939, the World's Fair tractor train by Arcade, and it is in marvelous, marvelous condition. This has been in your collection
6 years.
6 years you've gotten this. You've taken very good care of it. It's in great condition. I would say at an estimated auction value somewhere in the $800 to $1,000 range for that piece. Awesome piece, great condition. The next piece you brought here is an example of the Greyhound Silverside bus made by Buddy L. in the early 40s during the war. They had to go to wood because they didn't have any metal to press steel to make it during the war, so they went to a wooden bus. It's an awesome piece also, made around 1940, 41. I would estimate that piece to go at auction somewhere around $500 to $600.
Okay.
Okay?
All right.
But you brought in this really, really, really nice, large example of the Silverside. Can you explain to me what you know about it?
Well, from the gentleman that I purchased it from California, had it advertised as being in the movie The War of the Colossus Beast. And I've seen pictures of this bus, but I've never actually seen the bus itself. So I knew it was a good bus, and I knew it was going to be a good buy, and I purchased it from him.
All right, this bus was made by the mock-up division of GM, primarily for movies and for display in some of their locations. It's made out of plaster with some wood reinforcement. It was used, we looked it up a little bit and found out that the serial number on this bus, if we can pick this thing up here and look at it, right here,
okay.
It says property of mock-up department, GM Coach Division, with an 8267427 serial number. And that matches up with the same bus that was used in 1958 version of the War of the Colossus Beast. And what was happening during this movie was a group of school kids were traveling to an observatory on a field trip. And when the beast attacked, they used this as him raising it above his head, and all the kids were falling out of it. So it's pretty wild that you have an example of this. It's very hard to get this piece. We can't find pretty much a lot of info on pricing for this piece. Would you mind telling us what you paid for it?
Yes, I paid $2,500 for this bus.
About 6 months ago?
Yes.
I would say auction value, if you put it up for auction, you would probably get somewhere between $3,500 to $5,000 for this bus.
Okay.
Okay?
Okay.
Thank you for coming to Chesapeake Collectibles.
Thank you.
These collectibles have converged in our region from every corner of the world. I recently discovered an exquisite slice of Japan, right here in our own backyard. Akiko, the dolls are so beautiful. How many would you say you have?
Probably a little bit over 500.
Why are dolls so important in Japan?
It's human shape. The embodiments of our love and was the inner side of beauty of being a human. God always enjoys and loves people who create it.
Right, the creativity is so appreciated.
Yes.
So you made your first doll when you were 12, and now you are a master doll maker.
Yes,
and you've been
all
recognized.
my life, yes. Himekomi doll, the name comes from ki means wood, me is groove, and komi is tuck in. There is numerous body lines, and you groove and push in. Hobby become business. Business become my lifetime things for me to enjoy. I'll probably making dolls until the day I die.
Well, you have made some beautiful dolls, and you have collected some extraordinary dolls. I know it's a hard question because you have so many of them, but could you tell us about 3 of your favorite dolls?
One is the man who is training his falcon. His expression was a face, all the wrinkle and character lines, and there was just a little bit touch of gray was showing. The coloring of his pigment and skin color, it's come from being old, that naturally came that color. Just whole things reminds me of many history back then. This is my favorite one. I will probably keep
forever.
All the time. Yes,
Right.
yes.
Akiko, tell us about that beautiful lady.
This is made by Mrs. Akiko Inoue, National Living Treasure of Japan.
And because the artist who made it is so famous, does that make it more valuable?
Yes, I'm very, very proud to have her doll with me. This is a tea ceremony she's making, and she's concentrated. It's like a very pure cleansing mind of the cleansingness. And I like, sometimes I come in just to look at her and say hi.
And that 3rd doll is sensational. Tell us about that doll.
This is Shakkyo, they call. She's a well-known kabuki doll dancer. But for example, this silk, part of silk is the combed for about 3,000 times in order to make hair like that.
If a person who's watching would like to start collecting dolls, what would you recommend for them?
See the doll's eyes, look at the face, and if you receive some kind, warm, nice feeling received, I say this is a good doll. Doesn't matter child made for you, or that doesn't matter past master of the doll maker made or National Living Treasure made. Still, I would say if you can receive that, it's good doll.
You know, this has been so interesting for all of us, and I want to thank you so much for sharing your ideas, for sharing the dolls, for letting us learn a little bit about the fact that they are not only beautiful artistically, but that they have for you a spiritual value as well.
Thank you.
Welcome to Chesapeake Collectibles. Tell me a little bit about what you brought, these interesting figures.
Well, I was looking on eBay, and I like to collect objects that relate to the Holocaust. The man who sold them to me said that a friend of his grandparents were survivors and gave it to him, and then he said that they were made in a concentration camp, and that's what I was interested in buying them.
Well, you know, I've taken a look at them, and immediately what I'll point out, there is what looks like a small swastika, which actually is in reverse and is a symbol that was used in a lot of different cultures. Unfortunately, the most famous is the Nazi symbol. However, it was used in Native American culture and also in Asian cultures. And what these are, based on looking at, first of all, the faces of these figurines, they're Chinese, and they were made for the export market. If you actually look, you can see, for instance, on this one, you can see that little kind of pontal of hair in the back. They're made of clay and little cloth clothing. They were made to depict either beggars in China, or potentially, the Chinese did a lot of images of torture and prisons. So you can see how these were miscatalogued, whether or not it was out of malice and the person knew, but I certainly can understand how they could be miscatalogued. They date from around 1870s, probably to maybe 1900. The West was very fascinated with Chinese culture, and they brought a lot of things like this back. You gave me that provenance that you were talking about, and the analogy I'll use is the telephone game when you were little. And it starts out with one person saying one word, and then by the time it gets down the chain, the word is changed. And I think that's possibly what happened. But they depict well-delineated rib cages, so there's someone that is malnourished, malnutrition. So I understand how they were miscatalogued. But unfortunately, what you have are some 19th century Chinese export figures made for the Western market. Their value, and you had said that you'd paid $800. Unfortunately, in this condition, with the missing arms and the issues that are here, probably worth somewhere in the vicinity of maybe $75, $100 a piece at the most. But they aren't outright fakes or anything. They've just been miscatalogued, and that does happen, and it does happen on eBay.
It's hard to tell with the pictures that they give you because it's...
Sure.
You know,
well, you used in the future, do your research and assume potentially they might not be described correctly and try and figure out what you're looking at.
Late 1800s?
Late 1800s. But they're interesting, and I'm glad you brought them because it is a good illustration of how provenance and description can sometimes be different than what the item is. So they're fascinating objects, and thanks very much for bringing them.
All right, thank you.
She's not a nice she's still
The more I look at it, the more I see there's an early 20th century copy of a mid-18th century piece of furniture.
It's a combination of heavy wood, probably ebony, and leather. I believe the label is correct that it's African. It's probably
pretty neat.
A fertility figure, or the label also indicates that it's a fetish pot, because it very well could be that as well.
You know, this fob is enameled.
The fob is enameled?
Mm-hmm. This is enameling, blue enameling on here.
I didn't even notice it. It's like clothes enamel. Get out of town. It's probably karat gold then, too.
You know, I was initially thinking that gold filled, but I'm thinking it's
magnificent son of a gun, Jerry.
Hand engraved taste.
Oh, man.
Thanks so much for coming in today and bringing this lovely work of art to share with all of us. And what I'd like to share with the audience today is the fact that you have such important documentation here about this painting, and it was so wonderful that your mother could hang on to it for all these years with the original price and the provenance to stay with this. It helps all of us in not only what we do for value, but to validate its origin and things like this. Tell me what you know about this painting.
This painting was given to my mother 25 years ago by a very close friend. This person bought it in Bath, England in 1969. It had been in the Bath Festival exhibit and actually won in its category.
Deservingly so.
Yes.
Well, it's been well loved and well kept over the years. This painting was done by a British artist named William Barode, and he lived from 1810 until 1840, a very short length of time, but he was very prolific, and he's still being sold today by major galleries such as Sotheby's and Christie's. What you have here, I feel this painting was painted in the latter part of his life, but it is of great quality, typical of what he loved to paint, anything equestrian, horses, and the scene like that. What's so wonderful about this is the condition that it's in. I know it was bought in England and was bought from a gallery, and it has been, of course, cleaned, and it's in the original frame, and keeping the children together, as I say, I think is very, very important. We have the original bill of sale here where your mother bought this in the 1969 for, if I may mention the price, $6,000. But today this artist sells his major pieces for $200,000 to $300,000. Wow. His regular pieces, as I call them, like this, which are more marketable, sell today for from $25,000 to $50,000. And I would put an insurance value on this one, a minimum of $50,000 because of the quality that you have here. And I'm just so glad you have it, and I'm so glad you shared it with us today.
Well, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
We appreciate it.
I'm so amazed at what people have uncovered in old trunks or even in the trash. And you'll be amazed next time as we once again explore our history through our heirlooms.
Well, what's really interesting is that you have the original key to the chronometer.
Just pulled on my heartstrings when I saw her. I immediately wanted her.
and then the dump travels to the top of the tower, where it then dumps into the chute. It's very rare to find this piece in this condition.
The Maryland military story is a very important chapter, which is often overlooked by some historians.
I'm Rhea Fiken. See you next time on Chesapeake Collectibles.
Chesapeake Collectibles is made possible in part by the MPT New Initiative Fund, founded by Irene and Edward H. Kaplan. Additional funding for Chesapeake Collectibles provided by Preston Chef Knocker Properties, a real estate tradition since 1867.